between Jude and the Holy Spirit, he wrote some pretty masterful metaphors describing these people who had snuck in. They had maneuvered their way in, kind of undercover, into the company of the actual committed followers of Jesus, and they were dragging with them all kinds of error and lies and distortions. And from what, let's see, from about verse, yeah, I'm going back and back, about verse 4 on, I'm not going to call it a tirade, because it's not a tirade, but he just uses example after example and metaphor after metaphor for these people, and he enumerates a number of their the characteristics of these, I'm going to call them sneaky people. And none of his examples are positive. None of his metaphors are positive or even hopeful. In fact, by the time we get down here to verse 11, it's getting darker and darker and darker. Now, verse 11, woe to them. What in the world does woe to them mean? We don't use that. That's not something you say in conversational language. Woe to that person who didn't use their turn signal. Basically, what it means is bad stuff is ahead for this individual, this group, whoever. Woe is not the woe that you say to the pony. Woe is the warning. Hey, the bridge is out. There is sorrow ahead. In fact, the New Living Translation says, but oh, the sorrow that awaits these people. Then it goes on. They have taken the way of Cain. What is the way of Cain? Well, you got to go back to the story of Cain and Abel. For years, I had trouble remembering which of those two brothers killed the other one. And then somebody told me, well, it's not biblical, but it's a good way to help you remember who done what to who. When you think of Cain killed Abel with the leg of a table. Okay, so that Cain was the murderous brother, was the first murder in the whole human race, the whole history of humanity. It wasn't the first death. Remember the first death? Well, that would have been an animal death, where God would have had to have slain animals to create the dress for Adam and Eve after they sinned. He dressed them in animal skins. Okay. They've taken the way of Cain. What is the way of Cain? Well, look at the whole story. Why did Cain kill Abel? It was out of envy. I mean, that was the primary thing. And why? Well, it had to run it back even farther to the fact that Cain was a farmer, and he brought his offering to God. He brought grain as his offering. We don't know how much. We don't know how little. We don't know. I don't know. I mean, we just know he brought grain. Abel, he sacrificed animals. And whether it was because of what they sacrificed, which I am less believing that, or the condition of their heart, that's what I most believe. Abel and his sacrifice was accepted by God, approved by God. Cain's not. This infuriated Cain. it makes it a comical thing, and it wasn't comical to say, well, he likes you better. No, it was a deep, deep, deep animosity, deep, maybe the deepest kind of resentment. Cain catches Abel, they're alone, and he kills him. We don't know about was there an exchange of words? Was this certainly, did Cain just hide out waiting for Abel? We don't know. I suppose you've got latitude to invent your own scenario. The bottom line is Cain deceitfully, because he did this, this was not a murder that he did out in plain view. He did it. Nobody else knew what had happened except God, who said, your brother's blood is crying out to me. You remember, there's a famous phrase. God said to Cain, where's your brother? And Cain said, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? Okay. So many things wrong with what Cain did and what he said that I could go on and on and on. I don't need to, though. He was not living in reality. He had deceived himself. He felt he had a right to execute his brother Abel because he had his own reasons, and they were not rational. But he had deceived himself to the point that he believed they were rational. Does that sound like human nature? Now, you and I, pretty safe to say, have not committed murder. But boy, there are times when I've had pretty negative thoughts and feelings toward people, and I thought I was justified. I was deceiving myself because I wasn't justified. Well, okay. They took the way of Cain. Was this accidental? See, murder is not accidental. Manslaughter might be, but murder is not accidental. To murder someone, you got to intend to murder. Okay, they took the way of Cain. And then he says, they have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. Now, you got to know, see, Jude he's pointing back to Old Testament stories. Balaam's story to me is one of the interesting stories in the whole book of Exodus, the whole Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The pagan kings realized that the hordes of Israel were coming their way, and they had heard of the victories that Israel's army was gaining as they came across. And so they sent word to a prophet who somehow had become famous, whose name was Balaam. And if you haven't heard this story, you ought to look it up, find it, and read it for yourself. But they come to Balaam, and he says, I can't say anything that the Lord doesn't tell me to say. So I can't. Well, eventually these emissaries of the king promised all kinds of reward, and they finally the Lord said, okay, you should go. Go ahead, go. But only tell him what I tell you. Well, okay, that was his plan. So he begins the trip. He climbs on his donkey, the donkey he'd had for years and years, his faithful steed, and they begin the journey. The donkey sees in the pathway an angel with a drawn sword. Balaam doesn't see it. And the donkey stops. And Balaam, he kicks the donkey, no budging. He begins to beat the donkey with his staff. And finally, the angel moves and the donkey moves forward. And then they get a little farther up where there's a very narrow passage with the wall of a vineyard. And the donkey sees the angel again in the path, and he moves over and he crushes Balaam's foot against the wall. This infuriates Balaam. He gets off the donkey and begins to beat him again with his staff. And the donkey sits down and says, "Why are you beating me? I've been faithful to you all these years." So Balaam must have had a Narnian donkey, right? The donkey talked. This is the only time in the scriptures, this is the only time that an animal spoke. And as the donkey spoke, Balaam's eyes were open and he saw the angel with his sword drawn. And it was not, again, see, I remember when I first talked about angels, how we have kind of a very softened view of angels. Balaam, he didn't go, "Oh, gee, can I have your autograph?" Or, "Hey, this is very cool." No, he realized one misstep and I'm a goner. Well, the story continues and goes on. And Balaam is taken up where you can see the millions. I believe mathematically, Israel would have numbered around 3 million. And that's a lot of tents. And he saw this tent city spreading out horizon to horizon. And these kings, Balak principally, said to Balaam, "Curse them for us." And again, Balaam said, I can't. I can only do what God tells me. He said, "Go away, give me some space here." This is a very paraphrased version. And he asked God, "What should I say?" And God, instead of a curse, gave him a blessing to give. And he speaks a wonderful blessing over Israel. Balak is beside himself. What? He takes him to another location. Now, there's a whole bunch in this that don't have time to tell you about. But I think Balak believed God was located in one place geographically and physically, so you could get farther from and closer to him. Maybe we could get closer to God with a different view and he would change his mind. Well, superstitious people have superstitious beliefs. And so, anyway, they go to another location. Same thing happens. Balaam prays a prayer of blessing over Israel. And Balak is, he is so angry. Well, the story basically ends there, except it doesn't end. What Balak did, and we learn this later on, Balak kept after Balaam, and Balaam said, I can't do this curse thing, but I can tell you, here's something that could be effective. If your women go in and seduce Israelite men, and these men take them home as their wives, you can effectively infiltrate Israel and weaken them, which is exactly what happened, and became a thorn in Israel's side. Balaam, Jude is not talking about Balaam as this prophet who actually spoke for God. He's talking about Balaam's error. And the error was doing an end around on what God's told you to do. Then Jude goes on, they have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. Korah and his followers rebelled against Moses and Aaron, and they made a huge big deal about it. And I don't have time left in my 15 minutes to tell you the whole story, but the bottom line is the earth opened up and swallowed Korah and his family and his livestock. It wasn't like they were disciplined. They were destroyed. These three examples, Cain, Balaam, and Korah, there's nothing positive about any of those stories. And I'm going to be pointing back to these three stories for some points of application. But we'll have to do that next time because I'm out of time now on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.